Well, hello. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Alfonso Gambone. I am an attorney who represents clients in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Our law firm has both an estate planning practice and a criminal defense practice, which services clients in those states. This presentation is involving understanding Medicare, the long-term care, Medicaid, and planning strategies. This is a topic that is very important to families. Unfortunately, most families will have to deal with long-term care. We're all unfortunately going to get older, and whether it be for ourselves or our parents or our loved ones, we're going to have to think about planning strategies, and terms like Medicare, Medicaid, estate planning, doing things after we've passed on shouldn't scare us. We should take the opportunity to understand them now, so when the time does come, and the time is, again, inevitable for us all, the plans are in place so our family, our survivors can move on, and we can know that we've done our best to put them in a position where there's no confusion and they understand what we've done in terms of planning. So today I want to discuss all these topics, and I want to begin with Medicare, explaining what that is. And even if you believe that you understand these terms, I think it's a great review for every family to just go over. And in this presentation, if there are questions, I'll be certainly happy to take them at the end. But again, these are topics that you may have heard about, but may not necessarily know exactly what they mean. So let's begin with Medicare, and we'll go from there. This is our seminar agenda, where we will discuss these topics. Again, we will begin with Medicare and its limitations. I'll go into long-term care. I'll define that. I'll define Medicaid and what Medicaid is. Then from there, we'll define what Medicaid defines as assets and how those assets affect Medicaid eligibility. We'll also speak about asset transfers and how an asset transfer can influence or affect Medicaid eligibility. Then we'll go into some planning strategies with regards to preserving estates and preserving assets, and what to do, especially in situations where a person looking at a long-term care option has a spouse or has survivors living with them, and that person living with them is possibly disabled, whether it be a child or a sibling or some other person in the family. And finally, I will discuss estate recovery and what that means, and what states, Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and all states must do pursuant to federal law to recover monies that have been put out for persons who have taken advantage of the Medicaid program. So let's begin with what Medicare is. Medicare is a government health insurance program, and most situations, it's people who are using Medicare are 65 years of age or older. It does cover people under 65 years of age with certain disabilities, and it does cover people regardless of age who fall into certain diseases, end of life, renal disease. So that is what the Medicare program, that's an overview of who the Medicare program covers. Now, it's important to understand that Medicare pays healthcare costs, but it doesn't cover all healthcare costs. And for the purposes of our discussion today, healthcare costs will include not just the time spent at a hospital, sitting in a doctor's office, receiving some type of preventative treatment, but also long-term care, which may not necessarily involve skilled medical treatment, but just activities of daily life, which we'll speak about in a few minutes. But it does cover, Medicare does cover hospital stays. It covers limited time in a skilled nursing facility and limited home care and hospice services. But again, there's a cap on what Medicare will cover. So now we're going to get into Medicare Parts A, B, C, and D. And we'll start out with Part A. Now, Part A will cover a hospital stay from the first day to the 60th day. And Medicare will cover that minus a deductible, and I indicate the deductible there. All these values that I indicate here during our discussion today are 2021 values. So they will change a little maybe next year if they but just keep that in the back of your mind. If I don't indicate it on the slides, the values with regards to deductibles and other limits have to do with 2021. So Medicare will cover the first 60 days minus deductible, and then days 61 to 90, there will be a copayment of $329 per day. For days 91 and beyond at a hospital, again, we're speaking about a hospital, looking at a copayment of $658 a day. And after the 150th day, Medicare no longer covers the hospital stay, and that's where we get into, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, Medicaid and out-of-pocket costs. But let's focus on Medicare for a moment. Medicare does cover skilled nursing facilities. Again, a skilled nursing facility is defined as where a skilled service through a nurse or a nurse practitioner, or obviously a doctor, physical therapist, some type of skilled care is required. And Medicare will pay for that in full for the first 20 days. For days 21 to 100, there's a copayment of $164 per day, as long as the skilled need is required. In situations where Part A does not cover deductibles and other costs, there are also what is known as Medigap policies. And these policies, as I indicate here, do not include drug plan coverage, which we'll speak about in a few minutes, but Medigap coverage. And again, these are services and coverages that you want to speak to your healthcare provider about. But Medigap services, what those are, is it covers deductibles and other costs that aren't covered by Medicare. And I just talked about the deductibles, and that is something that Medigap can possibly help you with. Medicare Part B, we're looking at here coverage for traditional doctor's visits, emergency room, outpatient care, and other medical preventative services. So Part A, it's hospital coverage. Part B would be non-hospital coverage, non-hospital stay coverage. Emergency rooms, obviously, you're at the hospital, but again, that's Medicare Part B. If you're admitted to the hospital, well, then Part A would take over at that point. With regards to the cost of Part B, there is a monthly premium of $148.50. And again, this is income specific, and that people will pay that if their income is $88,000 a year for a single filer or less. And for joint filers, it's $176,000 a year or less. So if the income is below that amount, that will be the monthly premium paid for Medicare Part B. With regards to a yearly deductible, $203, again, this will cover the cost of services, and which for the Medicare recipient, and what the slide just indicates here, after the deductible is met, the cost of services to the recipient is 20% of the Medicare approved amount. So you'll be responsible for the 20% of whatever the cost of that service is. So what does Part A and Part B, what don't they cover? Again, we'll speak about long-term care in a few moments, but things that it won't cover: dental care, eye exams, dentures, cosmetic surgery, obviously acupuncture, things like hearing aids, and foot care. So again, Medicare Part A and Part B, hospital coverage and doctor's visits, excluding what I've indicated here. with regards to dental care and foot care and cosmetic surgery. Part C. Part C looks like a traditional HMO or PPO. And again, Part C is a plan that is provided to people receiving Medicare Part A and Part B. It's an optional coverage, but it provides extra coverage that will cover things like vision, hearing, dental, health and wellness programs. But again, there is no prescription part of Part C. So again, Medicare for prescription coverage, you're going to have to look to Medicare Part D. So Medicare Part D, it's the drug plan for Medicare, and the patient pays a monthly premium for the plan, and so instead of paying full price, the patient will pay a copay or a percentage of the drug's cost, and the insurance company will pay the rest. And each drug plan will separate its medication in different tiers. So the amount of the copay is based on the type of the drug, and I indicate there as an example. For instance, and again, these aren't exact figures. These are just examples, but you see the generic there for $7 copay, whereas the brand name would be $40. And there's a cap on this as well. So the insurance company is going to track the spending, and when it reaches a cap of, as of 2022, next year, $4,430, at that point, there will be a time where the patient will be responsible for 25% of the cost. With regards to that, again, there's a cap on that, which is, according to 2022, will be $7,050. When the patient reaches that limit of $4,430, that's what's known as the coverage gap. It's some people refer to as the donut hole, but that's where we get into 25% of the retail cost. So that is Medicare in a nutshell. With regards to long-term care, what we're going to get into now is what is considered long-term care, and then how do we pay for long-term care. So long-term care is medical and non-medical care to care for people with chronic illnesses or disabilities to meet health or personal needs. It assists people with the activities of daily life and can be provided in the home, in the community, or in assisted living or nursing homes. And what are examples of activities of daily life? I indicate them there, so you can just read it on the slide, but things like mobility, toileting, transferring, feeding, dressing, grooming, turning, these are all activities of daily life that long-term care would cover. So long-term care is expensive. I put some figures here on this slide. The cost of long-term care in 2021 for a private room annually looking at over $100,000. For a semi-private room, getting close to $90,000. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 40% of the people who reach age 65 will enter a nursing home at some point in time. And according to the same department, 10% of those individuals will stay there 5 years or longer. So obviously, these figures become a factor. How is long-term care paid for? 50% of long-term care is paid out of pocket. People pay it just from their own resources, whether it be through bank accounts, but obviously the cost of it, many people exhaust their own personal funds very quickly. And once people spend down their assets, that is when they become eligible for Medicaid. So Medicaid is a state and federal program. Since it's jointly funded, this is the reason why the federal government has placed the burden on the state to recover where it can monies paid on behalf of a person who's received Medicaid benefits. So Medicaid will pay for the cost of nursing home cares, and it pays for, in addition to fees for nursing home, it also pays in some cases home and services provided in the community. Now, eligibility is based on state guidelines, but all states, they're very similar guidelines, especially when we're talking about Pennsylvania and New Jersey. The asset requirement, and we're talking about, when I say assets, non-exempt assets, which I'll speak about in a few minutes, but $2,400 is the asset threshold. So not counting non-exempt assets, a person's assets cannot exceed that amount. Now, Pennsylvania, like many states, including New Jersey, allows an extra asset allowance of $6,000 if the person has a certain monthly income. So if your income is below $2,382, your asset requirement is actually $8,000. So that's just important to keep in mind. Now, what are assets? Assets, as you probably think, according to the government, are very broadly defined. It's pretty much anything that you receive or are entitled to, or that you would receive, whether it be an inheritance or some type of government entitlement or money's paid to you. So it's very broadly defined. And I do a list here, but again, this is not an exhaustive list, but this pretty much covers most situations. So checking, savings, pretty much anything that has money in it. What does not count? Now, this slide, I do indicate IRAs and 401ks and 403bs, but if you notice, I do put disbursements are counted. So if the money's in the account, it's not counted. But once it's being dispersed for the purposes of obviously being used, then Medicaid will count it. What counts as income? Again, broadly defined. We're looking at pensions, distributions, interest from trust accounts, pretty much anything that you would receive. Assets with regards to, and when I speak about assets, most times people are obviously concerned about their home. There's an equity limit on the home of $603,000. And this is for individuals who are receiving Medicaid but express an interest or express an intent rather to return home, and they really have to be in a position to return home for this home equity limit to take effect. So if a person, it's obvious that the person's not able to return home, well, then the person's house would be subject to Medicaid, and this home equity threshold of $600,000 would not be considered an excluded asset. Now, if the person's spouse or child under the age of 21 is still living in the house, that's where the house is considered an exempt asset. In addition to a person's home, real and personal property that's being used, that is also exempt. Non-business property, if it's used for support, tools, uniforms, things of that nature, household goods and personal effects are also exempt. Motor vehicles, you can keep one motor vehicle, which is exempt from Medicaid. After that one vehicle, and again, the one vehicle that they'll count is the vehicle which has the smallest equity value. That's the one that's going to be excluded. With regards to life insurance policy, that's also excluded, provided that the face value does not exceed $1,500, and also term life insurance. Other assets that are included, burial spaces, anything to do with a burial typically will be excluded from the assets. I'm talking specifically about here, prepaying funerals, funeral reserve trust, things that are going to be used for your final services, all that will be excluded. And now we'll get into the community spouse and what is meant by the community spouse resource allowance, and also who is a community spouse and how is that defined. Okay, so when it comes for the purposes of Medicaid, there are two terms that you'll hear: institutionalized spouse, I hate that word, but that's the word they use, and community spouse, AKA the healthy spouse. And how Medicaid treats resources, and resources is used interchangeably with the word assets. It means the same thing. Medicaid considers everything owned by the applicant or the applicant's spouse subject to possible use for the institutionalized spouse's care, less what is known as the community spouse resource allowance, which I'll speak about here. And again, so there's a limit there. It's half of the available assets, and I'm talking about things like bank accounts. And again, the home, we're not talking about that because again, when it comes to the home, if the community spouse is living in the home, that's exempt from Medicaid. But we're talking about things like bank accounts, any type of liquid assets, all of that. There's a max of $130,000, and there's a minimum of approximately $26,000. Again, income is all subject to being used for possible nursing home care. But again, there are exceptions, and the community spouse is permitted to receive an income allowance, and that is deemed not available for care. And there's a minimum monthly amount that the community spouse is permitted. And again, here is the value for 2021. So for 2021, the monthly income is $3,260. In addition, there's a shelter allowance. So for a total of $3,914, that would be considered what the community spouse would be entitled to with regards to monthly income received from things like rental properties, pensions. All that can be transferred to the community spouse and would not be subject to Medicaid for the purposes of being used for long-term care. Now, with regards to assets transferred, again, if it's being transferred from spouse to spouse, there is no effect on eligibility. And in addition, transfers, if they're done for fair market value, aka being sold, there is no effect on eligibility. It's only where we're getting into resources transferred for less than fair market value. In other words, gifts or giving things away to individuals within your family. There's a 5-year look back period. So that look back period will begin when the care begins and when the benefits are applied for. So any transfer made within that 5-year period is subject to being looked at as a possible invalid transfer, which would make a person ineligible for Medicaid benefits. But obviously, the goal of proper planning is to ensure that when transfers are made, they are permissible transfers that are not going to affect eligibility. And again, when it comes to calculating ineligibility, the state, like Pennsylvania and New Jersey, are going to use what is known as the penalty divisor, which for 2021 is approximately $11,099.04. And so they'll divide any gift by that amount to arrive at a possible ineligibility period. But again, the purposes of our discussion here is to explain how to avoid this issue. I give an example, which I think makes things a lot clearer. So a resident in 2019, nursing home resident gives her grandson $50,000 for college education, and thereafter enters a nursing home in 2020. In 2021, she exhausts all her personal assets. Well, that transfer was made in 2019, so it was in that 5-year gap. Medicaid will calculate her period of ineligibility at 4.5 months. So exempt transfers, again, I just stated transfers made to the spouse or individuals. And again, there are other exceptions with regards to transfers to siblings who have an equity interest in the home. But the key there is they have to be residing in the home for at least 1 year before the individual goes into the nursing home facility. Again, there are exceptions, but in most situations, these exceptions have to do with people who are residing in that home and providing care, and outside of siblings and children. Again, you have to be careful in terms of transfers made to individuals. Here are some other transfers. Again, any transfer made for the benefit of a disabled child or a blind child or a spouse, or a trust for an individual who's disabled, all those more than likely will be exempt transfers. But again, you want to speak to your attorney about that and make sure that what you're doing is not going to affect your eligibility in terms of long-term care and Medicaid. Again, I talk more about the look back period and what that involves. So here's some planning strategies. Again, you can spend money with regards to repairs to homes, paying down or paying off mortgages, purchasing a car. Again, that one car I spoke about before, prepaying funerals. All these things can be done, and these will not affect your Medicaid eligibility. Again, anything to do with your spouse, transfers to spouse, I mentioned the resource allowance. All these are permissible. It's not going to affect eligibility. Long-term care insurance. This is an option. From what I understand, it can be an expensive option, but it will cover long-term care. But again, the insurance companies will have to, there's an underwriting process there that some people may or may not qualify for. Estate recovery, as I indicated, it's a federal law which obligates states to seek recovery for Medicaid benefits paid. So the state can pretty much pursue anything that a person owns in terms of recovery. So if there is a Medicaid lien that results from a Medicaid from benefits paid through Medicaid, the state will pursue the estate for those benefits. So in most situations, for instance, a person enters a facility, the house, for instance, is not exempt because no one's living in it, and the person has entered a facility, the house has a value of $200,000, and the state, through the Medicaid program, provided $100,000 in Medicaid benefits. Well, those benefits would have to be paid back once the house was sold. So the heirs would not receive that $200,000, assuming that's what the house sold for. Obviously, other expenses associated with the house would be subtracted as well. Estate recovery, the state can only go after probate assets, but it's going to pursue recovery for all services provided. The executor or administrator of the estate is not liable, provided that they've acted accordingly, but they can become liable if they transfer property, for instance, give it to the heirs, distribute monies without satisfying that claim. So again, using that housing example as an example, if the person passes away, there's a house, the house is sold for $200,000, and subtracting out all the things like real estate commission, all those fees paid, let's assume for a second there's $175,000 left. If the executor or executrix transfers or gives that money and distributes according to a will, then they could be responsible for the claim. So again, these are things, if your loved one or if your loved one's receiving Medicaid services, you need to speak with a lawyer. You need to understand what is owed to the state, what needs to be satisfied to avoid possibly being liable. So basically, it's important just to finish up with Medicare does not cover everything, and it doesn't cover long-term care. Certainly, accountable assets are defined very broadly when it comes to Medicaid eligibility. The state, if it does if Medicaid is employed to pay for care, the state will seek that recovery. And but the fact that a person is receiving Medicaid benefits doesn't mean that they can't preserve their assets for their loved ones if it's done appropriately. So that's why you have to speak to a lawyer and understand what needs to be done. So that's all I have. If you have any questions, I will take them now. Here's my contact information. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all, and I wish you nothing but the best in the future.